All right, welcome to episode whatever number on the Business Mastery podcast. I think we're 5.
Thank you.
It's Friday afternoon, and so we're going to crack a beer. That's that magical sound on a Friday afternoon.
Cheers.
Cheers. And it should be said right at the outset that I'm interviewing Geordie Shaw from Shaw & Shaw Architects, and you may or may not have noticed that we share the same last name. That is, in fact, because we are brothers, and I'm also his coach. And we're going to talk business, architecture, beer, and whatever else comes up in the conversation today.
Traumatic childhood stories? Or?
We could share traumatic childhood stories.
Short list.
Mainly the things that I did to you. Why don't you kick us off, Geordie, with a bit of a overview of Shaw & Shaw Architects, who you are, what kind of homes you design, and...
Yep. So the other Shaw in our name is my wife, Emma, and fellow architect. So we started in 2020 and had our first team member, Michaela, join us in 2021, 22, and then Joanna, our latest team member, joined us at the beginning of last year. So a team of 4 now. And we started our business for a few different reasons, but one of them being we were getting pretty frustrated with the perception that architects are just for the wealthy, and we'd have friends come to us with a house they just bought. Maybe they just want to add a bathroom or an extra bedroom, that sort of thing, and say, oh, do you think you could do something for us? And we'd have to say, oh, probably the places where we're working, you're not going to be able to stomach the fees. So we really wanted to make architecture a bit more accessible to people, which is largely about making it affordable. So we just do housing, mostly new builds and additions and alterations, and we are just moving into the kind of public housing, townhouse, density done well space at the moment. So yeah, looking forward to diversifying a little bit in what we do.
Nice. And so you are, 4 years into the business journey now? 5?
Yeah, so we are 5th year.
Yeah. And so you're in an industry which is, as you said, has a few misperceptions, or maybe they're correct perceptions.
Yeah.
And one thing we always joke about is architects wearing glasses, wearing turtlenecks, and using words like ithmith.
Yeah.
Ithmith. But you're kind of breaking that perception, or at least it's your intent to break that perception with the work you're doing. What are some of the projects that you've done that you feel break that mold recently? Recently,
yeah. We're just kind of halfway through one project at the moment where we had a builder come to us who had a friend who was about to build a house with a group home builder, local group home builder, and they just weren't quite certain about the plan, so they'd taken it to their builder mate, and he said, in his blunt fashion, like, I don't think this is very good, don't build this house, sort of thing. And he said, I'll take it to Geordie and Emma, get their opinion. And he brought it in, and I had a look at it, and I thought, like sometimes you can just tweak a few things on a plan, like, maybe it just needs to go over here and make this a bit smaller or a bit larger. And I was looking at this and just thinking, this is a really more of a start again type situation. So I put some tracing paper on top of the plan and just traced out how much wasted circulation space, which is a good jargon word, but basically hallway space. It was kind of dead end corridors to get from the main part of the house to a bedroom. They had 3 skylights and 3 solar tubes. to get light into those spaces because they were so far from the perimeter of the house. And then, just traced over that and showed him there was about 25 or so square meters of just wasted space, really. And I said, look, if you give us a go at designing this house, I think we could probably cut that in half. If we cut that in half, keep all the rest of the rooms the same size, that pretty much covers our fee. And so he said, oh yeah, I'll take that back to that client. And then eventually had a discussion with them, and that's been really fascinating because it's in the sort of later design stages now, and it's smaller, the footprint's smaller than what they had with the group home builder, but each room is larger. So all we've done is just arrange the spaces better, and to us that's what design is about. Like, sure, we can pick expensive taps and put giant windows in and that sort of thing, but just getting those fundamentals right is actually really exciting for us to just have a much more efficient floor plan. So that's probably the first one that comes to mind. They also had this tree in their backyard that I think I told you about, where I was asking Sam the builder if they liked the tree, and he was like, yeah, it's their favourite thing about the property. And I said, well, the plan that they've got, like, you can't see the tree from inside. They had the group home builders plan had the master bedroom sort of wardrobe with no windows, the closest thing to the tree, and so we've sort of rearranged the plan so that you get a nice view through the house from when you walk in. Sort of the first thing that you'll see on the other side of the house is this beautiful mature tree. So little moments like that is part of what we say is good architecture as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because the construction industry is an interesting one that I've kind of been on both sides of, and it's interesting how the perception is that if you use a group home builder that you'll spend less, and that's not always the case. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's like a lot of industries. There's always going to be someone doing something for as cheap as possible. And some people, that's genuinely what they want. They don't care too much if their house is warm or cold or
well-designed.
But I think everyone has something that they care about. And like for the clients who I was talking about before, they actually really wanted a warm house. They're immigrants to New Zealand, and so they are used to, a warm climate, and they're just a bit perplexed at why all of these homes are getting built with 90mm framing, or 4x2s. So, it's like the thing that we're trying to communicate with these clients is that you can actually have those things, but it is going to be more expensive than that minimum cheapest way to build. But if you don't need your house to be 260 square meters, we can take out 15 square meters, as we did, of this sort of these wasted areas, and then put those savings back into things like more insulation in the walls. And construction is expensive. It's crazy how expensive everything is at the moment. So there's no getting around that. Like, things are going to cost you probably more than what you think they are going to. But I think that it's just about identifying for us, like, what is important to the clients. Is it a warm home? Is it larger? You don't mind having to crank a heat pump or a fire year round, that sort of thing. So just figuring out what's actually important to people rather than just cheapest possible this, cheapest possible this, cheapest possible this.
I guess the assumption is that if you engage an architect, it's going to cost a boatload of money.
Yeah.
And the architect only cares about how the building looks. They care about, is there such a mid-2000s example, but is there black stained cedar on the outside with brass windows, etc. But that might be the perception. But what you're saying is that good design moves beyond the aesthetic. It's about the form and function of the house. It's about how it's heated, the floor plan, how it's designed,
Yeah.
not just how it looks.
Yeah, there's definitely, we definitely come up against that a little bit in terms of when we first having conversations with clients, most of the people that come to us, they're not usually picking between us and another architect. They've heard about us through a builder or, friend of a friend sort of thing, but they're not choosing between us and another architect. It might be an architectural designer or a draftsman who's said it's going to cost $5,000 and we'll do everything, and just maybe even the DIY approach as well. So there is that little bit of a fear of, I have to pay you some money, and what am I getting for that? And there's that fear as well of we're going to go off on this tangent and tell them they have to have black stained cedar or whatever it is. But and I think there are some architects that work that way, like they have a certain characteristic to their work, and you kind of come to them and you kind of commissioning an artwork effectively to live in. Whereas I think the way we operate, and still a lot of other architects operate, is what are you wanting as the client, and then how can we best achieve that? So there's a lot for us. We spend a lot of time with the clients at the beginning, kind of sorting that stuff out, because everyone's really quite different in how they use a house, and the costs that are associated with different things. Like, some people don't necessarily understand that. For instance, how expensive it is to have a tiled bathroom. If you don't spend heaps of time in your bathroom, but you'd prefer to have like a bigger kitchen that does a bit more for you than just has a little tiny oven and that kind of thing, then maybe it's about shifting some of the budget from that part of the house to another, or Not sure if I answered your question there.
Yeah, well, I guess the question was around how important are some of those other elements to what you do, as opposed to just the design.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have a broader approach, but also then the market needs to be educated on, hey, this is not all we do. And it's perhaps a bit more, it's a bit more well-rounded than what the perception is, which is and I suppose some of that comes from programs like Grand Design, and a lot of the architecture shows are recently watched the British guy on doing the tour around New Zealand.
Yeah, the location
guy. What's his name? Forget. But anywho, and one of the architects he visited was referring to this client who had commissioned him, and he just said, "I just want this to be a piece of art."
Yeah.
And he said, and he does that again, and he always says, "This is my last house," and then he does another one.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this compulsive art buyer that's going from museum or art show to art show, picking the next biggest thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is a perception that carries over into architects like yourself. I suppose we'd be remiss not to talk about the difference between an architect and an architectural designer, which is something you've educated me, and I'm sure a lot of other people on. But what is the difference between an architect and an architectural designer?
Yeah, so in New Zealand and a lot of other countries, to call yourself an architect, you have to be a registered architect, and it's actually illegal to call yourself an architect or infer that you're an architect if you haven't reached that standard. So typically that means you've done a 5-year university degree, got a master's, and worked for a number of years. I think it's sort of about 3 minimum, but for most people it'll be 6, 7, 8 years of working under another registered architect before you are ready to sit what's called registration. And so you submit a case study, 15,000 words up to, and then have a 3-hour conversation with assessors, and the fail rate's still fairly high. So I guess to become an architect, it's a fairly high bar. To call yourself an architectural designer, anyone can call themselves an architectural designer. In New Zealand, there's a licensing class, so similar to how builders get licensed. So you can be a LBP designer. And yeah, it's like a 2-page application, a referral from a mate. You don't have to have any formal qualifications. So the bar's quite low. Like, in saying that, there's some really awesome architectural designers out there. It's just from the consumer side of things, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. And a lot informally, like a lot of builders will still refer to an architectural designer as an architect.
Yep.
And so often we've had, a few clients come to us and they've worked with someone before and they said, oh, my architect said this or that, or we had these issues. And then as I dig a bit deeper, I'm like, oh no, they're not an architect. And, if you were dealing with an architect, I think some of those issues wouldn't have come up. But really, generally the difference is an architect's going to have had a bit more design education and have like continuing professional development. So every year we have to do a certain amount of work effectively to keep our level of education up. The construction industry is pretty fast moving, so yeah.
Practically, in terms of what, and we can talk about professional indemnity, but in terms of if you're looking at the work of an architectural designer and the work of an architect, what would the differences be that you see practically?
Yeah, like I think like I said before, there's some architectural designers out there that are incredible, and I know a couple who have kind of gone through that pathway, rather than the university pathway to get registered. Basically, you can kind of do a work experience and then this alternative pathway, and some of them have got registered recently. But so in some instances, you wouldn't be able to tell the outcome wise, but at the same time, the work of like some of those more, I guess, cowboy type designers that are out there versus an architect, you just see some pretty weird things, like odd junctions with different materials coming together, poor like proportion and scale, so things just look too big or too small. You see like really poor examples of weather tightness where perhaps the designer hasn't been involved in the construction side of things. The feedback we've had from builders is often that the specifications are really thin and light from some of the designers they've had, so less interest or less understanding of the different materials and how they all come together. Those are probably some of the things that I see.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my perspective on it, but I often see developments that are done, or even houses that are done by an architectural designer, and I think they're kind of like 75% the way there.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, you can tell it's not, dare I say it, a Williams Corp example. It's like slightly refined.
Yeah.
And then you see some of the projects that get nominated for some of the NZIA awards, and you can tell they've just been so well developed. The ideas have been so well developed and refined. Every little detail is just on point.
Yeah.
From an aesthetic perspective, I'm not sure in terms of an actual usability, functionality, detailed design standpoint, but it seems like there is a
the level
noticeable difference.
Level of resolution that you see is like, that's where some of the differences start to come in. And I think I suppose there's a lot of architects will kind of have a way of designing that they refine over time and with each project, and so I think that often you'll see in an architect's kind of portfolio, one project will build on the strength of the next one, and so they're kind of trying to not use too much jargon here, but iterating or building on the basis of they're kind of continually improving each house and their kind of understanding of claddings and materials that they're using. So especially some architects that you'll see that are later in their careers, they're doing one thing really well and they're just masters of it.
Yeah. Thinking about your one more question on the art, and then I'm going to move to the business side. When you think about, because you've lived in Wellington, you've visited a number of cities overseas, and you've seen different ways that cities are put together. When you think about Christchurch and you think about where we are as a city, having rebuilt a large part of it from the from the earthquakes, and there's also a number of key projects still on the go, stadium still being built, bunch of sites in the city that are still empty, etc. When you think about the city, what would your vision for the city be through the lens of an architect?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Like, I think the best thing that Christchurch has done as a city, and I think it's been, you know, fairly intentional from the council and sort of council planners' perspective, is turning our attention to the Avon. And I think that kind of focus and usability of that space now is really awesome in the central city. Like, it used to be that you just had a couple of park benches strewn along there, and it was sort of the back gutter, effectively, of the city, it felt like, in some parts. So I think that connection to the I guess natural landscape that we have in the central city is really unique. Like, to compare with Wellington's got this waterfront which is beautiful and incredible. And 20 years ago or something, had like the V8 supercars track went right around there. And so, like, even Te Papa got built, I don't know if you know this, but Te Papa got built back from the sea edge because they wanted to still have the supercars race around there. And then it was, 5 or 10 years later, they were like, oh, we won't do that anymore. So in the meantime, you kind of stranded this building. So I don't know with Christchurch. I think like what it's missing is, I think, is sort of this conversation around, like, are we just this little regional town still, or are we wanting to be a city? And like, for anyone that's been overseas, like, not even to Europe, but like most of Asia, any like large city overseas will have like a public transport system that everybody uses. Like, when we went to London, I was really surprised at, like, you're on the underground, the tube, and you've got a businessman on one side of you and a mum with her kids on the other side, and then there's still, like, just all sorts of people using that system. Whereas in New Zealand, like, I caught the bus with my son a wee while ago. It was after 5, and a couple of tradies got on, and I was sitting next to them, and ended up having a bit of a yarn, and they were kind of like quite embarrassed that they were on the bus, and they were hopping off on Colombo Street, like they were, like, further up towards the hills. But, like, why would you drive from 5-10 minutes out of the city and park a car when you can hop on the bus, a couple of bucks, and get home, like, it's every 10 minutes or something? So I think for me it's that transport link, and that idea that we can't just constantly keep building more roads in the central city. Like, all the cheap, easy roads have been built, and that's my thoughts.
It is interesting. We just spent 5 weeks in Australia, and even in Brisbane, the highway there is usually 4, if not 5 lanes on both sides of the road, so effectively 10 lanes. One of them's an exit lane, so there's just cars continuously exiting. Then there's a fast lane, and usually 3 sort of medium lanes. And on a Saturday morning and a Friday afternoon and every dinner time, they're just absolutely chocker, like, gridlocked. And it was just interesting to me that Brisbane's a much bigger city than Christchurch, but they still have these traffic situations, shall we call it, and also I don't know where they're at with public transport, but it made me think about Christchurch and how we just don't have that public transport network. We are effectively doing the exact same thing, just building these roads and then jamming them up. But it is interesting, I think. One thing I noticed in Australia was the standard of development is just next level. Like the townhouse developments in a lot of areas were just when I say next level, like the design, the refinement of those designs was just highly, highly polished. It just made I think a lot of whilst I'm stoked that there's a lot of development happening in our city, I think a lot of it's pretty embarrassing when you compare it to some of the standard overseas. But it is interesting. I was going to just go back to that around your perspective. I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily believe that architects would have a vision for the city that included public transport. They might just think it'd be super high-end homes, which is interesting in and of itself. But when you think about, to touch on that specifically, when you think of the housing landscape, the vernacular, that's my one architectural word for the day.
You have to have a little explainer down the bottom.
Explainer, the state and standard of the housing that makes up the city. What do you picture for that? And if you could just control the design of everything that was being built.
Yeah, it'd be great to see some diversity of colour, wouldn't it? I mean
what do you mean by that?
As in, like if you look at Resine's top 10 colours, I think even their top 20 colours, it's like 19 different shades of white and a very light grey. That's the top 20 interior colours. And then you look at Colour Steel that does the metal roofing, top 10 colours, it's various shades of grey again. And people are so hesitant. I don't know if it's, there's that classic, thing of Christchurch being quite conservative, but we had some clients who were doing a house and clad it in corrugate. Like they had a very tight budget, and so this is metal cladding is a really good cost saver, phenomenally cheap, super durable. It's great, but it's pretty dull and black or grey. So we were like, we're thinking about this nice kind of soft green, and they were like, we were thinking of grey, and I was like, just sit with it for a little bit. We gave them a few images to see it in context, and eventually they were like, we're gonna do the green. And as soon as it went up, they were saying to us that they had neighbours and people walking past say, I love the colour. Everyone loves seeing the colour, observing the colour. No one wants to commit themselves to doing it. But I know for those clients, they nicknamed it the little greenhouse, because that was like a defining characteristic of it, and just brings so much joy, just a little bit of colour. So maybe that would be my first point. And I think it's because the construction industry is dominated really by the real estate industry. And if you talk to a real estate agent, I'm probably going to burn a whole nother section of people. If you talk to many real estate agents, and that's the advice that you get is, don't do anything too out there, because
got to think about resale.
And it's like, look, if someone hates the fact that you've painted your lounge, heaven forbid, blue, they're going to repaint it white. That's okay. But I think most of us actually do really enjoy being in bright, colourful spaces. Like you think about when you go out with friends out to a pub or to a restaurant, it's pretty rare that you're in a fully white and grey space. Like restaurants are filled with colour and energy, and that's a lovely space to be in. And even things like timber, some natural materials, what that does to your appreciation of a space is something special. But in Christchurch we've had you talked about Williams Court before. We've had a ton of very poor housing in the city. And so I think people are, for good reason, pretty afraid of what is happening when a townhouse development pops up next to them, because in their mind they're thinking, well, I've seen it happen here. and this is pretty crap. So like it would be great to see. I mean, and there are pockets, but by and large, the bulk of it is getting pushed by companies who, like, they operate as an investment company. Like, they're building housing, but that's not their model. They're wanting people to invest in them, and they'll give you a return. So their focus is on what's the return financially that they can get, not what's this person's life going to be like in this house this year, and then what about in 50 years' time? So I think it would be great to have a bit more long-term thinking in the housing as well. Like, you think about some of the buildings that did get saved out of the earthquakes, and how much care people gave to things like the town hall, the cathedral. Maybe not the best example given the costs, but people care about those buildings because 50, 100 years ago, an architect, a builder, a client, all the tradesmen involved really put a lot of care and energy into those places. And it's the same with like a really nice house. Like, we're working on a few additions, alterations, where clients have a 50 or 100-year-old house that they love and they want to keep. But how many of these townhouses are people going to be looking on in 50 years or even 20 years' time and thinking, this is such a great place to live in, I want to keep it and do it up, So, I think that long-term thinking would be great to bring to our housing.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? And I suppose the counter to that would be, if I was listening to this and thinking about perhaps what you're suggesting, the fear might be, but you're just, you're suggesting we build these next level looking things and no one will be able to afford them, and the developer will make no money. And so is there a place there or a model in which those could be built? Yeah,
well, I mean, if you think about the villa, like, people love villas. Our younger sister wanted to have a villa for ages. Why? It's like, because they're pretty. Someone's thought about the beauty of those things. But those villas and a lot of the bungalows across Christchurch, they were the group home builds of 100 years ago. Most of those weren't designed by architects. Well, actually, a lot of them were, but they were copied and pasted effectively. But you can see the craftsmanship in them. And unfortunately now, labour has a cost component to it, and that's why our houses look like they're assembled out of flat sort of soulless components. But so I think it's just about changing tact a little bit and thinking, okay, well, maybe we're not going to get an ornate carved fireplace, hearth, or whatever it is, in there, but what if we just proportioned the windows nicely? That would be a great start. What if the roof pitch was nice to look at and shed water, but didn't look, like a sea of, I'm thinking of lots of different disgusting descriptions for, some of the roof sort of forms and shapes that you see. But I think it doesn't necessarily have to cost more. It just has to have a little bit of thought behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think like good design is one of those things that I like that quote, that good design is invisible. It's you don't necessarily look at something that's well designed and go, man, that thing is incredibly well designed. It's not over the top or obvious necessarily, but it's the time and thought that goes into those well-designed things means that there is the longevity to them. And obviously we're biased because of our environment and things like that. But I think, my fear around that stuff is that, as you said, in 20 years' time, will that be appealing to someone, or will that be pulled down? Or significantly changed, and then the economics of it change. And I think when you look, and we've renovated a house that's 100 years old that was very bitsy, and the frustration with that was like, man, why didn't you guys just do this properly the first time? And I feel like with our city, there's a lot of fear around that. Even on our couple of streets down from us, there's a couple of new houses that crack me up because they're one thing I noticed in Brisbane was a lot of the designs moved to these rounded corners, and but it's like the whole house is rounded, everything, the kitchen, the outside, the pool, the tiles, like everything has these radius kind of corners, and down the street there's a couple of brand new builds, and they've done one corner that's radiused or one little edge, and it kind of makes me think about it's the feature, but it's this sort of, let's dip our toes into this, but it's not like let's fully commit. And I think as a city it's interesting how we have that. Maybe it's the conservative farming roots, or maybe it's just the psyche of Cantabrians that we kind of give things a little go, but we won't go all out. We'll give it a little soft green, but we won't go bright green and really commit. And perhaps that's why we see so much white and black.
I think so.
Gable forms.
But I feel like there's a nice balance as well between totally conservative and soulless, and outrageous,
bit more playful
on that edge. But there's also something in between where it's just has a little bit of character and a little bit of life, and reflects the people who live and work in these places. So
So that's probably a good segue into the business, because obviously the art is really important to you, and I think a lot of people will relate to that if they're owners. They've come to their business most often with a craft or a technical skill set of some description, but with yours in particular, there's a draw to want to continue that. There's a high value placed on that, and you've spent a lot of your life investing in acquiring those skills. Talk to me about that blend, or the dichotomy between business and art.
Well, where to start? I suppose, like when you study architecture, like you're going through architecture school, the way it works is in the design papers is you are working on a design. It's your idea. You've got a brief, and then you have to stand up in front of your peers and present this idea. And there's tears, there's like fear, and then kind of elation if you do well, right? And I think a lot of architects kind of take that, or I'll speak about myself, I feel like I took that into when we started a business. I'm thinking, I'm working on this house, and I suppose this is the fee, this tiny fee that we've got, and I've blasted through the fee, but the house is not quite right yet, and so I just want to keep working on it, keep perfecting it, because eventually I'm going to have this house. I want the clients to be stoked with it. I want to get it up on our website and on Instagram, etc., and have our peers and friends say, that's a great. And so I think those two things that seem at odds, you think, well, we've only agreed this small fee, and how am I going to run a business if I'm charging this amount and spending this amount? So figuring out that has probably been the biggest challenge, and kind of understanding how to communicate our value to the clients so that we can work like at a level that reflects how much we're getting paid. And so I suppose for us practically, we've just developed a means to provide fees to clients but give them different options. And so if they aren't too bothered about how the house is going to look, or they're happy to trust us, then we don't spend a lot of time showing them renders, and like we do 3D walkthroughs and all that sort of thing. So we can give you like a basic drawing set that's still going to be 100 times better than if you're going off somewhere else. But at the same time, you can do the other end of the spectrum where your client wants heaps of engagement. So I think figuring those things out has helped us value what we're bringing to clients. But it doesn't feel natural. Like my natural tendency is still to keep working on something until it's perfect, rather than stop because, or get it to a point where it's good enough. This is a better way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that the challenge between, or the tension between the art and I think business is art as well, but it's just a different skill set. And so you come to business with this well of skills, and you're really well practiced in those, and that's your identity, and you feel good about doing those skills. In your case, it's being an architect, but running a business is a different set of skills. Yeah. And so the tension for people is often like, well, why do I want to do something that I feel like I suck at? I'd rather do the technical bit. Yeah. If I'm a painter, I'd rather go and paint because I know I'm good at that, and I feel that sense of unconscious competence when I'm doing it. I can do this in my sleep. It's like riding a bike. And then when it comes to the business, it's an uncomfortable feeling. So how have you kind of overcome that? What have your strategies been to
just can't see you pretty much?
That's true.
I think like when Emma and I were talking about starting our business, and you said, we could do some coaching together, and I sort of thought, well, but you don't know anything about architecture. And this is what I often I say to mates who when I end up talking about being coached, and I always tell this story. I was like, well, you've got no idea, Marcus. and you didn't, but of course that's why we needed you, because even something as simple as like invoicing, at the start when we only had a couple of projects and cash flow is difficult, you said to us at one point, well, what's your payment time? And we were saying, 30 days. And you're like, why? And we're just saying, well, that's just how it's done. And you're saying, why? And then we're suddenly having to think, why? And then change it to 7 days, and then suddenly the cash flow is flowing. Cash flow issue's gone, and no one's ever complained about it. I mean, well, every now and then a client says, I might need to pay next week, but then that's like 14 days instead of 30 days plus another 30 sort of thing. So little things like that where an outsider's perspective helps override like the assumptions that we make.
Yeah, and I think the reframing that the whole building the business so that you can have the choice to do the craft, and or not. But if you build a business that's actually efficient, and runs like a well-oiled machine, then you give yourself the choice. And I think for you, the choice is more toward doing the craft and the art. But hey, it's nice to have a business that isn't dependent on you.
And I think we realized if we're setting out to make architecture more accessible to people, we can't do that if it's just Emma and I working
on the drawing board all day. We need to bring people along with us, and we're fortunate to have our first 2 team members have been awesome and are like an integral part of the business. But that way we can actually do more than double what in terms of output and that kind of thing. So but it is a real, I still find it a challenge. I tend to still be thinking through most issues with my architect hat on, as opposed to I'm a director of an architecture practice hat on. Yeah. What are some of the things that you've done and implemented business-wise that have made life easier for you? Made a big difference.
Well, I'm a big optimist, and so in our first year of business, I tended to think, well, this, say we've met with a client, I'm like, I'm pretty sure they loved us. We're going to get that project, and sometimes that's the case, and then sometimes that's the case, but maybe they're only signing the contract 6 months later, or something like that. So I think things like having a cash flow forecast is like the dullest thing I could have ever thought about before. Now it's really exciting to open that and see, oh, actually, this is how we're working things out. This is how our sort of pipeline of projects is looking, and I think it's just that like knowledge is power thing. Before it was just a bit of a blur as to where we were going to be in terms of cash flow and all of those sort of things in like the next month, let alone the next year. So, but that took a bit of work to get that done, and it sort of grates against me. Like I want to be a little bit more like, free flow and
Go with the flow.
go with the flow. So I think a cash flow forecast has been huge. And even like we've talked a lot about marketing and even social media, and like architects, generalizing here, but we hate sales. We hate advertising what we do. And so that has been a real challenge as well. Like I only ever want to be posting these images that are absolutely perfect. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with that idea at university where I'm pinning this work up and getting judged by my peers. And so I kind of want that level, but really like most people can't tell, if the thing's not 100% resolved, like they're getting the gist of what we're doing. And yeah, I think I remember posting like a story of what I thought was a bit of an awkward angle looking down a stair, but it had quite a cool balustrade that we'd designed and this little sort of seat at the bottom. And I was like this close to not posting. And I was like, it's just a bit awkward, and I'd like to, bring the timber materials out a bit more, and the lighting's not quite right. And I was like, I'm just going to post it, and posted it, and then had like the most comments on it, like people saying, how have you done that? And whereabouts is this? And yeah, so just trying to get a little bit less precious about things, which we tend to be as architects, being quite details focused. And yeah, even the reels that we've started doing for Geordie Corner, which is this little house addition we're doing to our house for our mum. And so started doing these little like video diaries that are excruciating to film, like so cringy. But we've had, like our son's friends' parents say, I saw your thing, when we're at football. And like most people outside of just commenting on an Instagram post of a photo or a construction detail or something like that would never bring it up with me in person. But when they see someone on video, as awkward as I am, talking about something and explaining it in, fairly simple terms, then I think that's really engaging for people. But it's like I'm kind of posting those videos with I'm a director hat on, not with I'm an architect hat on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important there's this great book called The Alter Ego by Todd Herman, and he talks about putting on those different identities in order to get the most out of yourself in a particular field of play. And I think what you're doing there when you take off that architect hat and then put on the business owner, director hat, and go, I'm going to do this video, it does require a different mindset. It does require a different set of skills. It does require a different system. But in doing so, you actually get the thing that you're actually after as a craftsman, which is more incredible projects.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a certain irony in that.
There is, yeah.
So you talked about the cash flow forecast. What else have you done financially that's made a difference for you guys?
Good question. Like even things like working out our hourly rate on the basis of what our actual costs are, so that we know that if we're achieving our sort of productivity targets, which I suppose would be another one, that we've got enough to survive and enough to do the next project, and we're not stretching ourselves too thin. And I guess we're trying to keep our fees as competitive and as fair as possible. So the only way we can do that is by understanding, well, how much work does it take to design a house or a bathroom alteration or a one bedroom addition. So yeah, just having the numbers behind that has been massive, because instead of me being optimistic and saying, I think we could do it for this amount, I can actually say, well, these are 5 projects and they range from this to this, and so this potential project's going to fit in here. So yeah, I think it's just given us the power to keep our fees as tight as we want them to be without jeopardising us as a business. Like, construction's been pretty slow over the last couple of years. There's been unreal amounts of liquidations for builders, and architects are not immune from that as well. I know a lot of practices who have let staff go, who are downsizing or that sort of thing, and so for us, it's comforting to know that this is the minimum that we need to get by, and
Yeah, and I think recently taking that view of, we know that we have these productivity targets, and then closing the communication loop so you're not leaving it to once a month.
Yeah.
And I like your little system in terms of just sending your team the red, green, orange light every week and saying, hey, you're on target, you're off, and having that as a weekly communication, I think makes a huge difference. It's something that, if you're not tracking productivity, you should be, especially if you're a professional service and you're charging time for money. But then secondly, if you're not actually having a discussion with your team about what's happening, and then you've also done a couple of other things in terms of the way that that time was blowing out, in terms of bringing that back in and making it clear about your expectations. I think one other thing that stands out to me is the way you've rethought, well, I guess 2 things. One, and I'd be interested for you to talk on how you've managed your team, because you've come from a couple of practices where you noticed some things that you wanted to change in your own context, and then also the way that you've managed your sales process, because I think that's quite different to a lot of architects. So do you want to talk about those 2 things?
So managing team sort of feels like I'm just winging it sometimes. I had just got registered as an architect at my last practice, and it was a fairly hierarchical, like traditional architecture practice with directors and then sort of senior architects and then architectural graduates and draftsmen, and so the project teams were like fairly hierarchical, which is not unusual. And so as a architectural graduate, you're kind of at the end of that chain. So a director or a senior architect's meeting the client, doing design work, and kind of got a fully realised building by the time they hand it off. And so, you're not super involved necessarily in those early discussions. And one thing we set out to do, that Emma and I were really keen on, was just having our team members involved as much as possible from right at the start, so they've got buy-in, so that they understand the client, and so that eventually they can lead that process themselves. So I think I've just been, I guess as a director, just trying to encourage our team as much as possible to just seize those opportunities and get them in the room, and so I don't know if I've got any particular insight into leadership there, but
I think even the way you guys do your continuous conversations, your 90-day check-ins with your team,
that's
your team meetings, your values, the
I mean, that's
vision.
all stuff that we've kind of pulled out from you rather than stuff that's innate to us. But yeah, so one of them is, I think at the start it was like, oh, well, this is when we'll do our annual review. And you were saying, oh, why not quarterly? And I was, again, oh, well, I've never seen it done quarterly. Is that a bit much? Can you do a review every quarter sort of thing? But that's been great. Like we just had ours this week actually, and it was awesome to be like, oh, well, 3 months ago we set these goals and you've achieved them all, and this is the next thing to work on. Is that what you feel like you want to work on? And we also get some feedback about like what we're doing well or could improve as directors as well. So that's really helpful. But yeah, I think the regularity of that feedback is critical for improvement, because in my early career it's like, well, you're only meeting to talk about how well you're doing once a year, so like how can you really be
Too late.
It's too late. It's sort of like, oh, if I had known that you wanted me to improve in this area half a year ago, that would have been so I think just making the space for that has been really, really critical. And
how do you think about that space? Because as you said, it's not natural. It's not the norm. So how do you think about, well, practically, how do you do it? And then what's your mindset around doing it?
So practically, we meet once a quarter with each of our team members
And how do you structure that? Like, as in, how do you make sure that actually happens? It's not just an idea.
Yeah, so it's in the calendar. So lock it in the calendar.
And you send it to the team member and yourself and Emma.
Ourselves. Yeah, so it's actually just like it's not
recurring.
Just for the next one. It's recurring. So months in advance that it's there, and maybe we just bring it up in the team meeting the week of, or just to remind everyone. And so Emma and I would usually prepare an hour or two, depending on what's happening, and just go through a list of general things. What's happening with us as a practice? Where are we going? What's the last quarter been like? And then just run through a series of sort of topics or questions. So one of them is like, what's been challenging over the last few months, which is always really insightful. And I mentioned before, like, where can we improve as directors in terms of how we're managing you? And then the other part of it is really formed with different stages of an architecture project. So sort of the beginning stages, and so there's some sort of technical questions, what documentation and BIM, which is our computer sort of software modelling. What are you looking to improve on? So usually Emma and I will identify one or two things that we think could be improved on, or it was maybe not working out so well. And then a couple of things that are, usually there's a number of things that they're doing really well, and just highlight those, because it's nice for them, I think, to understand how well they're doing. And that's sort of the practicalities of it. And I guess,
So when you see that coming up in your calendar and you're thinking, man, I've got so much to do. I've got this project due. I've got this client waiting for me. This person to go back to. Yeah.
So Emma and I have had to also put our preparation time in the calendar as well. So I think you've probably shared before about like the default diary, and just once you've got something in your calendar and you're looking at your week ahead and you're thinking, oh, I've got these extra tasks to do, you fit them around the things that are already in there. So once it's in there, my mindset is just, well, that's when I'm doing that. So if a client's trying to book a meeting on that day, it's blocked out in my calendar, so they can't. That from a practical perspective is helpful. But I mean, things do come up. Like I think one of them, it's Emma and I were preparing in our evening rather than in our workday, so that that's challenging. But I think when you do them, you see the engagement from our team members, and you see you're reflecting, like, how far have they come in the last quarter. Like that's really motivating as a director. So you sort of think, oh, it's worth keeping on doing them.
Yeah, and one thing that you've made quite clear, and I think it was something that you nailed early, was around your vision and mission and values. I think you really I think that's something that can get pushed out and pushed out, and there's a number of businesses, well-established businesses, that have a very vague sense of their destination. But you nailed that pretty early. What impact has that had on the business, and then how do you use that practically, I guess?
So a part of our vision, or a big focus, is making architecture accessible. So that means that as architects we have to be able to talk easily with our clients, communicate with them, communicate with builders really well. And so we just are constantly thinking and talking in the studio about how we do that. One of the things, one of our team members who had worked at another established practice had said when she started was she really enjoyed how we talk about a problem just openly in the studio. Like, it might be a mistake that I've made or someone else has made, because mistakes get made. And instead of sort of the blame resting on someone, we are learning from it, and we're saying, okay, so we missed this. Should we put that into we've got a checklist for our projects. I think it was I'm trying to remember which one that was. Might have been about making sure there's space for a toilet roll holder. Sounds quite stupid, but if you don't end up with a toilet adjacent to a wall, if you've got it between a basin on one side and then a shower on the other, sometimes there's not a logical place to put the toilet roll holder, and you're left trying to, you see some awkward ones where they're fixed onto the shower glass, or I think in this instance the client wanted a vanity anyway, so you could kind of fix it to the side of the vanity, no big issue. But we were just panicking for a second, there's no wall or good spot to put it. So little things like that you come across it on one part of the project, put it into our checklist. And so anyway, she was just saying it's nice that we talk through our problems together and figure those things out. So nice. That was a bit of a tangent, sorry.
That's great. And talk through your sales process, because again that's quite different to the typical model. How have you rethought that, and what impacts that had on the business?
So I guess a lot of other professional services will have this challenge as well, but if you go into a cafe and you want a coffee, it's pretty standard. You hand over your card or you tap it and you've got your coffee. With architectural services, there's kind of three ways that they get done. Hourly rate, great for us, not so great for the client, because they never know exactly what size of bill they're going to have. And so if people have money, and they've got trust, then that's not such an issue. But if people have a tight budget, like 99% of our clients, then that's a real concern for them. So that's a common way fees get charged. Another common way is, which has been very common historically, a little bit less so now, but is a percentage of the construction cost. So you might pay your architect between 5 to 15% of your total construction cost. And the idea behind that is, usually the more expensive something gets, the larger or the more complex it is, and therefore the more work's involved. But it sort of falls down a little bit where there's, a good example is if you change your wall linings from plasterboard, being one of the cheaper materials, to Meranti plywood or something like that, then your square metre rate or your construction costs have shot through the roof. But our job hasn't got significantly harder, so there's sort of these parts where it falls down, and it's just confusing for clients. So, and then the other way is fixed fees, which is our typical model. So fixed fees are great for the client because they know exactly how much it's going to cost them to get from, no idea of what they want to do or a little idea of what they want to do to here's your building consent, or if we're involved through construction, here's your keys at the end of the project. But it's really difficult for an architect to understand, especially at the outset, how much work is going to be involved. So our sales process has been focused around providing a fixed fee to clients, but gaining enough information from them to understand how much work is involved in order to provide that fixed fee.
And so what led you to want to do things differently?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I mentioned at the start with why Emma and I wanted to start our own architecture practice was friends, family who wanted to do something just wanted to know how much it would cost and how we could help them. But the typical model of an architecture practice just it's a little bit hard to like get into. Because most people haven't used an architect before, or most people, often it's the first house they're building or their first renovation.
You don't build a lot of houses.
You don't build a lot of houses, yeah. So you've got nothing to compare it to. And I think, I guess it's like any industry. If you work in that industry, you can lose sight a little bit of the fact that most people don't know how much it costs to renovate a kitchen or to build a new house, or they're using outdated numbers like their uncles built a house 5 years ago, and so they think it's going to cost the same now. That sort of metric. So yeah, we really wanted to provide that certainty because we felt like that was something that talking to our friends and family and people, that was a barrier for them to use an architect. So we just thought, well, if that's a barrier, like what could we do to take it a different way? And I think the second part of that is like we'd both worked on projects, Emma and I, before, where our understanding was that this is the direction that the project was going in, and then we've been in a meeting, where the client's seeing their project for the first time and they're like, hang on, I thought we were going to be over here. And whether that's, I don't know, they hate brick or whatever it is, and you didn't know that, and because you've just started on an hourly rate, or you're working on a percentage of a construction cost, and you haven't like delved into what they really want. And or it might be more related to the size of the house or something like that. So we realized as well, like often the client's expectation for the general direction of the house and like the architect's understanding would not be well aligned. And it's not that we've got it perfect by any means. Like there's always going to be back and forth in the design process, but generally, like when we sit down and present a concept design, 9 times out of 10 it's pretty close to what the client was, not necessarily what they were expecting, but it's meeting their brief. Like often we're trying to
it's what they hoped for.
Yeah, or sort of sometimes they're thinking it's going to be this, and we say it could be this, and sometimes we'll sketch that out and draw that out, but actually there's this opportunity over here which you haven't thought about, because why would you? You've never designed a house before, or altered a kitchen before. And they're like, oh yeah,
didn't think about that,
and yeah, you're like, don't worry, that's what we're here for. That's why we're getting paid little dollars. Big bucks.
Yeah, but I guess that's why you engage a professional, and hence professional services, because you don't have the reps that they have. You haven't seen that problem the same number of times as them. But I think what the key thing that you're doing is and I think you do it really well as far as the whole customer journey goes, is you're constantly coming back to how is this for them? What would make it easier for them? How would this make more sense for them? And that coming back to the customer, seeing life through their lens. Yeah. And I think that's possibly as well the benefit that you have when you engage someone who's outside of your world, is because I don't look at it the same way you look at it. And I'm looking at it through a whole bunch of other business owners, different business types lens as well. But I think what you've ended up with is a process that is very different from a lot of what your competitors are doing. Arguably not competitors, given that the size of your potential target market, but and the mission of your company as well. But yeah, you've come up with something that's quite a different process, initially at least. And so just talking on that for a moment, how do you think about your customers? Who is an ideal customer for you?
Yeah, I think that was like one of the first sort of business planning things we did. It was probably an exercise that we found somewhere, and it's write out who your ideal client is, and we just wrote out like it was effectively just people like us, a young couple, young family who don't have heaps of cash, but who don't want to live in a rubbish house that they freeze their ass off in winter and swelter in summer. And so I think that was kind of who we set out to try and attract was people like us, young families, not a lot of money, and really our client base is much broader than that. Like we've had young single guys as clients, and older retired couples, and kind of everything in between. And so I'm not really certain what unites them all, other than that I guess they've wanted either a new house or an addition or an alteration. But I guess all of them have had like a fear about the process. They were concerned about, either they're worried about how expensive it's going to be, or worried that they're not going to get the outcome that they want, and worried perhaps that as an architect that we're going to override their hopes and dreams and push our vision for what their house is going to look like. So I guess we have a pretty colourful website, and so that probably might sort the wheat from the chaff to begin with. And we're not a very stuffy like elite practice. So if you're wanting to build a $10 million bond layer, like you're probably not coming to us. There's plenty of architects who will give you an awesome bond layer with secret doors and a triple garage for your Mercedes or whatever it is, But so I think just people who...
Not to discriminate against people that drive Mercedes.
If you've got a Mercedes and you're looking for an architect, then we definitely will not turn you away.
Unless you're looking for a bond there.
Yeah, true. Well, yeah. Just can't be just black.
Yeah. Black cedar. I guess it's important to know, though, on that, like jokes aside, it is important to know who it is that you don't want as a customer, as it is to know who you do want. And I think you have attracted people that are like yourselves. That's inevitable. Like Simon Sinek says, if you say what you believe, you'll attract people who believe the same. Yeah. And I think that's true. You've got a set of beliefs around architecture that will attract people, and your colourful website will put some people off, and other people will go, man, that's really refreshing. Yeah, I like that. So, but I guess again, you've spent the time thinking about who these people are, and then you've crafted your vision and mission around that, and you've built your business around that, from your sales process to your website. So I see your company as a very customer-centric business, and I'm sure that's going to put you in good stead for the future. Speaking of the future, where do you see the business 3 to 5 years from now?
Well, it would be nice to have our own studio. That's one of the main ones. When we set up, it was straight into COVID, and we sort of had dreams of a nice, sophisticated inner city studio in a warehouse somewhere or something cool. Ended up in the spare room underneath the house, and
which has now become a studio.
Yeah. But I think we were quite self-conscious of that at the beginning. And we had a client, and they'd just gone to two, like I don't really need to name drop, but two, top architecture practices. And so, one of the first questions we say is like, oh, what other options are you considering? And they're like, oh, we've just been to Architect A and Architect B. And I was like, okay. And they're like, yeah, we didn't feel very welcomed. And, it was kind of a receptionist like turned around the screen and showed them and sort of said, have you been to our website, and so, here we are, sort of in an extension of our home, effectively, and they were feeling really welcomed. We're doing the project with them, and they're awesome clients, and big loss to the other guys. But yeah, I think that idea of like welcoming, we want to keep that as we grow, and we want to keep the personable nature of our practice as we grow. So 3 to 4 years, hopefully with our own studio, another few architects and graduates in the mix, take us up around 8. And we've got a couple of projects at the moment that are in the public housing realm. So we're really keen to do more of that work as well, especially as a kind of key interest that we have is in making architecture, accessible but also affordable. And really we're at a point in our country and city where it's just not for a lot of people, and a lot of the public housing that's out there is some of it's good, but some of it's still pretty average. So we'd like to make a bit of a mark, improve upon that as well. So there's a really great not-for-profit housing developer that we are working with on one project that's really exciting.
Cool.
So kind of have some shared values, and so providing housing, providing architecture, like really well designed housing to a broader group of people will be really fulfilling as well.
Nice. And if someone is watching this and wants to reach out, how do they do it, Geordie? Where do they find you?
You can email hello@shoreanshore.co.nz. You can email me, Geordie.
What if I'm a scammer?
If you're a scammer, I don't know.
Nigerian prince.
We've had a few.
Looking for a bride.
We've had a few. Looking for
a home for his $125 million.
Rendering services. You can find us on Instagram as well. That's where it's at.
Cool.
Yeah, Shore and Shore Architects.
Shore and Shore Architects, a name to watch, and lots of projects on the drawing board and in construction at the moment. So you may see some in magazines soon.
Yeah, we just need a few more clients to get their landscaping sorted, and then we'll have some more photos.
Nice. All right. Well, let's finish with, if you had a message or a key piece of advice learning from your experience, what would you recommend to a business owner watching this?
Well, it's the obvious one is get a business coach.
You're making me blush, Geordie.
Well, no, honestly, like a few people, especially people that I went through uni with who are setting out and starting a business as well. Like I just say, you need an outside perspective. You need someone who is going to think the way that your clients are going to be thinking, not the way that you're thinking. And if that's a business coach, great, obviously, for you. But even if it's your mum, your dad, little things like, what do you think of our logo? Does that look like something you'd be interested in? What about our website? Those little things, because otherwise you're just like rehashing the same stuff. So
So other than hiring a business coach / business mastery, we actually have 2 coaches.
True.
What would your advice be
to other business owners? I feel like
otherwise it feels like I just set that up.
Yeah, I know it does. He didn't. Well, I think. It's tricky. Like I guess I didn't get into business to
become a business owner.
Like I just wanted to do more good architecture, and so it's a little bit difficult.
Business was the vehicle,
yeah. But I think something that I'm realizing more recently is that as a business owner, you just have the ability to really positively influence so much more than what you do if you don't have that opportunity. And just to be grateful of that and to keep that in your mind, especially through the hard times, because they'll be there.
Yeah, and we've just come through a bloody tough winter. This winter just gone by. Can say that now because it's spring, and Yeah, I firmly believe that. I think, as a business owner, and you've talked about it with your staff and the impact that you can have on them, the impact that you can have by proxy on their families and the wider community, especially with the work you do, but no different from any other professional service or any other business for that matter. The impact is just immense. You can change your life, sure, but you can change a lot of others as well.
Yep.
And I certainly agree with that. Good stuff. And just one final thing is, don't always take your family's advice on logos, websites, colours, etc.
But at least ask.
At least ask and then politely ignore it. Just a funny anecdote that I was thinking of this morning is when I walked out to my truck, which has a personalised plate that says B Coach, and this is an example of why you shouldn't ask your family. And I sent on the family chat, hey, I'm thinking about getting a personalised plate. These are the things I'm thinking of getting. What do you think? And everyone replied with a nice, like, I think this, I think that. And Geordie replied with, I would never get a personalised plate because I hate them. Well, I got the personalised plate anyway, and I'm very happy with it.
Good for you?
It's been good for me, yeah. It's been very good. So on that positive note, thank you for coming on, Geordie, and see you on the next one.